Okay, so we are now live and we will officially begin in 5 minutes.
I should begin?
No, in 5 minutes po, Prof.
Okay, 5 minutes. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
Do we start admitting?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
please. Okay, Prof. Mary, we may begin now.
Begin.
Yes.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. We are very pleased to be able to welcome you once again to the fourth and somewhat regrettably for some of us, the last of the series on people-led housing. This is a series that has been sponsored by the Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies of the Erasmus University in the Netherlands, while in combination with or together with the Ateneo de Manila Department of Sociology and Anthropology. We have been very privileged over the last 4 weeks of having many other co-sponsors, you might say, reflected in the presenters who have been here, various commentators, and some of them you will meet again today. And they came from all sectors, grassroots organizations, partner NGOs, university-based academics from South and Southeast Asia, South America, Europe. Again, this is a very rich source of information and kind of a learning network for all of us. The live cases have been offering examples of people-led social housing, and I think we begin to see how it's really quite intricate. It's really a process. It involves a lot of connections, one with the other in the community and outside communities as well. Today, we are privileged to have two proponents from India and the Philippines to discuss their people's plan proposals. And this is one of the things we want to bring to the fore, people's plans, because they're the ones who compose them and, of course, discuss first with their own members, but then promoted to whether it's the government, private sector people who are linked to their efforts to gain decent and affordable housing in their own settings. So we hope that you will appreciate and understand what this alternative form of development with vibrant, organized, low-income communities means when they're in the center, not on the fringes, not the marginalized, but in the center, because when they are, they can take the lead. The examples that we have shown you over the past weeks, and there are many more worldwide, certainly amply show this. So the participatory planning process is crucial in this entire effort. Again, there are two people, you know it already, but I think their contributions are so significant, we should mention them again, as having been the movers and shakers in this whole planning of this seminar and working it out, and that is Dr. MAARTJE van Eer, who comes from the European side, Erasmus, and the other, Dr. Melissa Cutulio Navarra, who is a member of the Ateneo's Department of Sociology and Anthropology. So I think you already know that MAARTJE is a human demographer by profession, while Melissa Navarra is likewise an assistant professor in the department here. So we need to bring in everybody, and therefore I will turn this over to MAARTJE for you to take over. MAARTJE.
Thank you, Mary, for giving us the background and this nice introduction. For the sake of time, we have a very full, very exciting, but full program. I will only briefly introduce the speakers, and please, for their full bio, please look at the chat. Before we dive into the presentation of the people's plans from India and the Philippines, we will listen first to Pierre Arnold and Nina Quintas. Nina Quintas and Pierre Arnold work at UrbaMonde, Nina in Switzerland and Pierre in France. UrbaMonde is an NGO based in Switzerland and France that offers technical support to public actors in participative urban development projects, as well as to groups of inhabitants implementing collaborative housing solutions while promoting innovative, non-speculative land management and access to affordable housing. UrbaMonde operates locally and globally. Nina and Pierre will discuss the findings of their global scale study that tested the hypothesis that community-led housing initiatives allow their residents to collectively organize, defend their rights, and develop resilience mechanisms in response to income loss and reduction due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So Pierre and Nina, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Can you see my screen correctly, and can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you very much. So with Nina, we're going to present the results of a study that we made in the last month of 2020, which was about community-led housing as a response to COVID-19 contexts and issues. As it has already been said, we are a member of an NGO called UrbaMonde, which is facilitating the promotion, documentation, and financing tools for community-led housing or people-led housing. And we are also part of a larger group and a network of organizations, which is called Cohabitat, in which the Asian Coalition for Housing Rights, for example, participates, but also Slum Dwellers International, organizations like Habitat International Coalition, and others from the whole world who are also focusing on community-led housing as solutions to promote at different levels. In the midst of last year, we were wondering with a partner called WeEffect that is also in Cohabitat, how people living in community-led housing have been able to react or organize to face a pandemic, and if community-led housing gives advantages for the people to cope with the social and economic effects of the pandemic. And we were looking for some good practices that we could promote for future crises, to be able to learn from what is happening in community-led housing initiatives during the pandemic. The whole study is already available, and so you can freely download it either in English, Spanish, French, or Portuguese from the website that is shown up. And we will show it again at the end. How we did to make work in a very short time. We first did a global survey. We've had it open during September and October from last year. And we have had responses from people all around the world who could respond either using smartphones or computers. And we've had a participation that is about more than 1,000 valid responses from 72 countries or islands from the Caribbean. And to complete the information from the survey, we made with Nina 52 interviews to survey participants who agreed to leave their contact information. And we had 3 interviews to WeEffect representatives. WeEffect is an organization that is based in Sweden, but it has also branches in the whole world promoting cooperative solutions for housing, but also for sustainable agriculture, for example. And an important note about the study itself, the survey wasn't conducted on a statistically representative sample. So all the numbers that we are going to show are the percentages that cannot be like expanded to the whole world or are not necessarily representative of the population of a country. It is just representative of the sample, but still it shows trends and situations that can be meaningful to learn from, and especially about the difference between different housing tenures, which is what was interesting for us to note in this study. And we have in the study like 27 case studies from different places in the world. So there is also qualitative data and information we can learn from in the study. About the survey participants, very quickly, we've had a distribution per region. From a larger part of responses came from Asia, and only 1 response from Australia, but then the second region with most responses are both Latin America and Europe and North America and the Caribbean. But in terms of countries represented, we have more countries from Africa and the Middle East with very low response rates. We have some countries where there are only 2 or 3 responses, so it's not representative of the countries, but still it gives a regional approach that is quite interesting. And we have had more than half of the participation from women, 57%, and in regions like Latin America and Europe, women are 64% of the respondents. And globally, half of the participants are between 30 and 49 years old. And then we've had one of the questions was to determine.
Sorry. Yeah, could you speak a bit louder, please, in the
louder.
mic? Yes,
Okay.
please, and a bit more in the mic. Thanks.
I don't have mic, but I will speak louder. We've had a question about in which kind of housing people live. And then we have here the distribution of how the respondents are living. And part of the respondents are living in, half of the respondents are living either in rental housing, private rental housing, or fully paid individual property. And then we have had also people living in borrowed housing, which may probably be informally rented, not with a contract housing. And other 11% are currently acquiring individual property, so they are still paying for a mortgage to access housing. And then we've had a part that is interesting for our study, which is people living in collectively owned land, which are represented by housing cooperatives and by community land trusts, which are detailed in the study to know how these mechanisms works. And in Latin America, which is a region where there are many cooperatives that are promoted by WeEffect, we've had a larger participation from housing cooperatives. About some of the key results, about the effects of the pandemic on the local economy. Of course, we know now that the pandemic has impacted largely the economy, and that it's also different from a region to another. So we can note that from the respondents, 60% of the whole respondents consider the pandemic has had a high impact on the local economy and employment, but there are major differences. For example, in Europe, this is about 46%, while in Africa and Middle East and in Latin America, 70% consider the high impact on local economy. And then in the loss of incomes, it's quite similar. Globally, 43% of all the respondents have lost more than half or the entire income that they had since the beginning of the pandemic. And this is quite high in Asia and in Africa and Latin America compared with Europe, where only about 10% of the people lost their whole income or more than half of the income. And another key issue that is seen in the study is about the threat of evictions from housing. And so we've asked people if they had felt threatened by evictions before the pandemic and since the beginning of the pandemic. Globally, there were fewer participants that were threatened since the beginning of the pandemic, except in Africa and Middle East, where there are a very impressive number of respondents, 21%, who said they had been threatened since the beginning of the pandemic. And in other regions, this number is a bit lower, like in Latin America. And now analyzing it through the filter of the type of housing tenure, it is very interesting to note that people who have been threatened are mainly living in irregular or land ownership situations, and also in public or private rental housing, and that people living in housing cooperatives or in community land trusts, that means collectively and land ownership, they haven't been threatened at all since the beginning of the pandemic. In the next question, we asked people if they had effectively been evicted from these people who had been threatened, who really was evicted in the last month between March and July 2020. And we've had responses from people who in fact have been evicted, 7%. From the 7% that had been threatened, we've had about 28 who have really been evicted, and mostly women participants. And as you can see, it is mostly in Asia and Latin America and Africa. And if we now filter it again about the housing type, we see that most of the people who have been evicted were living in irregular land ownership, but also in private rental housing. So there are many people who have been evicted from rental housing, and also from fully paid individual property. So people who were living in a place where they had a title for, that were evicted also during the pandemic. And we asked people about the collective land ownership as an asset to be able to cope with the pandemic's effects. And we have had a lot of interesting answers of people who say that collective land ownership gives more security to people to face the evictions. And that if there is a crisis or not a crisis, the fact of having a cooperative housing or non-speculative housing is a protection for people, because they don't get evicted that easy than in private housing or in private rental housing. We've had other testimonies also from community land trusts, which are exactly for this purpose, to hinder the speculation and also to protect people from being evicted when there is an economic crisis. So the people who are paying a mortgage won't go through foreclosure if they are in a community land trust, because there is a protective model to really try not to go into these evictions. That's one of the key aspects that shows that people are protected when they're in community-led and collectively owned ownership. I will leave the floor to Nina for the next step.
Thank you, Pierre. Now on the next slides, what we would like to share with you is how residents and neighbors organize themselves to face the pandemic collectively. First of all, in one of the questions of the survey, we asked participants if they were members of any community organization regardless the pandemic. 32.1% responded yes. But here what is interesting to note is that respondents living in housing cooperatives, communal land trusts with collective land ownership, and participants living in irregular land ownership participated much more in community organizations, with percentages, as you can see, around 60%, almost twice the average. In another question, we asked participants if they had organized with neighbors in the context of the pandemic, and 38.8% said yes. But here again, those living in collective property and with irregular tenancy were much more involved in neighborhood solidarity initiatives in the pandemic context. It's also interesting to note that the participation of women was higher than that of men in both cases. So next slide. We just saw that 38.8% of respondents have participated in some neighborhood initiative during the pandemic. To understand more about those initiatives, we asked the participants to clarify in which area they have organized with neighbors. So you can see on the screen the different options we gave in the survey. And in other words, we asked the participants who collectively organized with neighbors to specify if those activities were related to COVID-19 prevention, to food security, to neighborhood care, and so on. And right after, we asked those who participated in any of those initiatives to describe them exactly with their own words. So in the study, we've also had the chance to do a qualitative analysis. And what I want to show you next is some of the results that came out of this analysis. Since we have 8 different...
2 minutes, Nina, sorry, two minutes left, sorry.
Okay. Since we have 8 different initiatives, as I've just showed, I'm only going to present you the 3 most mentioned areas of initiative, which were the initiatives that most counted with the participation of our participants, which are the COVID-19 prevention initiatives, the food security initiatives, and the neighborhood and the care initiatives. Okay. So with the qualitative analysis, we saw, for example, that in prevention initiatives, most responses mentioned the raise of awareness about preventive measures. In one reply from Mozambique, a participant told us that in his community, there was done a sensitization in terms of prevention of COVID-19. Regarding the food security initiatives, the most mentioned activity was the donation and distribution of food. One respondent from Costa Rica told that together with neighbors, they carried out campaigns for collection and solidarity distribution of food and groceries. Finally, regarding the care initiatives, the majority of responses mentioned the assisting neighbors with shopping. And here we had an inspiring reply from the UK, which says, I posted notes to my neighbors to say I could go shopping for them if they were unable to go themselves. So we did this type of analysis for all other areas of initiatives that I showed you earlier. Since we don't have much time here, I'm not going to present them all. Moving on to the next question. We asked participants whether collective ownership is an advantage in the face of the pandemic. And 88% of those who live in community land trusts and housing cooperatives believe that yes, collective ownership has advantages when dealing with the impacts of the crisis if compared to other land types of land tenure. When we asked them why, we've also had many interesting testimonies. I'm not going to go through them now, but they're all in the study, and I do invite you all to go check it out. I leave the floor now to Pierre to present you quickly the conclusions.
Thank you, Nina. Sorry about the short time. And as main conclusions, we can state again the fact that people living in community land trusts, cooperative housing, but also some co-housing initiatives have a strong feeling of community that has advantages in terms of protecting them from expulsion, from evictions. And so the land tenure security is a very strong asset in these events. And so independently, if you lost incomes, you're not forced to move out, and you're not afraid of being thrown to the street if you are living with a strong community-led housing. And another kind of aspect is the capacity of generating incomes, because you have a strong neighborhood and a strong community you can lean on to generate incomes in these kind of situations. And solidarity initiatives also, you can rely on your neighbors to collectively, for example, have help for children, for vulnerable people. You can trust on them, and so you can easily get organized to adapt and be resilient to the crisis. Nina?
So another important conclusion of our study regards the collectiveness and the union characteristic of community-led housing, which often helps alleviating the weight of certain tasks, especially for women. But it's equally important to notice that this sense of collectiveness also provides for an important emotional and psychological support against isolation, especially during the pandemic. And at last but not least, the study points for the urgency of having public policies that favor community-led housing through regulatory frameworks, access to land, financing, and technical assistance. The COVID-19 crisis has made it even more evident the urgency of seeing housing as a right and not as a commodity. So here we leave our call for all local, regional, national authorities to concretely support and recognize those initiatives. Thank you very much for your attention, and you can download the study in this link, as you see on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina and Pierre, for this very interesting study in the presentation. Could you upload the link in the chat, please? Then our participants can have a look. If to the participants, if you have questions for Nina and Pierre, please post them in the chat, and then during the webinar, Pierre and Nina can respond to the questions. Okay, thank you very much. Now we will move to the people's plans from India and the Philippines. And the first one to present her people's plan is Vanessa Peter. Vanessa works for informal settlements and the urban homeless across the state of Tamil Nadu in India. She is the founder of the Information and Resource Center for the Deprived Urban Communities in Chennai. She was instrumental in the designing and implementation of shelter for urban homeless for the Greater Chennai Corporation. Presently, she is a member of the Shelter Advisory Committee to monitor the program. Vanessa, in her presentation, will highlight the gaps in the existing legal framework in India related to community participation mechanisms in the housing programs. She will compare examples from the cities of Chennai and Madurai, where initiatives were undertaken to enhance community participation in housing programs, and she will present her people's plan. So Vanessa, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can we have the slide, please? Yeah, the presentation, please. Yes, thank you. So greetings everyone from the Information and Resource Center for the Urban Deprived Communities. I hope I'm audible. Yes. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
thank you.
No.
So the presentation is basically about the kind of challenges that communities face in terms of community-led housing plans in India. So what are the major factors that are not enabling? So we'll first start the presentation with a policy analysis that has been done by IRCDC, followed by our plan of action. Next slide, please. So yeah, can we have the next slide? Yeah, thank you. So, you know, one of the most important thing is to realize we have been analyzing both the legislations as well as the policies related to land and housing in the country, just to see whether how much of legal safeguard is there for the communities. So an analysis taken up in the year 2019 reveals that out of the 29 states, there are only 14 states that has some sort of a legislation related to land and housing for the informal settlements. The next slide, please. So when it comes to policies, as far as India is concerned, there are certain state level policies which are on housing. And if you look at it again, out of the 29 states, only 13 states have state level housing policy, which brings to the fact that, first of all, there is very limited legal safeguards when it comes to land and housing in the country. The next slide, please. So, if you were to look at states, out of the 29 states, only 10 states have both legal as well as policy safeguards, so available to protect, you know, their rights, communities' rights to adequate housing as well as right to land. Next one. So if you were to look at it, our analysis reveals something very, you know, one of the most important findings of this particular analysis is out of the 14 states that has legislations specifically related to land and housing for informal settlement and low-income settlements, only one state has provision on community consultation processes, which simply means that when there is no policy safeguards available, the state governments are not mandated to have these processes in place. So when the state governments are not mandated, it is very difficult to, you know, it takes the community-based groups to demand for their particular space to be consulted, to make their voices heard. The next slide. So if you were to look at it, in the policy, there was only one, in the legislation, there was only one state that has a specific component on housing. Whereas if you were to look at the housing policies, which were all came up in the last decade, you'll see that 5 particular states have specific provisions related to community participation. And of these 5 states, 4 of these states are, you know, have mentioned about formation of cooperatives for implementation of the program. And one state talks about establishing or facilitating formations of community level committees to participate to design the houses. So the rest of the states, including Tamil Nadu, where I come from, which is in the southernmost part of the country, though there is a policy, it does not talk about or does not provide any space for community consultation processes. Next slide, please. So if you were to look at the legal framework of the country, we see that one, there is no specific safeguards available for communities, and even when states which has safeguards does not have specific components on community, you know, led initiatives. But however, the problem is that the existing housing programs of the country, which includes the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is the Housing for All scheme, that out of all the 4 components, only the beneficiary-led construction, which is one of the subcomponents of this particular program, has some sort of a community engagement initiative. Rest in all the other implementation of the other housing schemes, communities are completely distanced. And we have the predecessors of the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana was the Rajiv Awas Yojana scheme, which had a a guideline for community participation. However, in our work experiences in Tamil Nadu, we've realized that the community participation guidelines, one, was not implemented. Secondly, people were not aware about these community participation guidelines because it was never made available in the vernacular language, which comes to one of the biggest challenge. Most of the laws, the policies and the guidelines which are available are never made available in the vernacular language. And even if few documents are available in the vernacular language, it is only disseminated in the public domains, in the internet, in the government's website. So there is no initiatives where there has been a dissemination process with the community. So this limits the scope of community-led housing initiatives in the country, and which also emphasizes that there is an emerging need for advocate for enhanced community participation in community-led initiatives across the country. Next slide, please. So though there were presentations about the World Bank project in the Mumbai urban transportation project, which was made on Mumbai, there has been instances, but if you look at all of these instances of community-led initiatives, it was because of the pressure, or because of the it was an outcome of various advocacy initiatives of the civil society organizations and the community-based organizations. So now my presentation is is from two cities of Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu, as you see in the slide, is located in the southernmost part of the country. And I'll be making a presentation from Madurai, of one of the cities of Madurai, which is located in central south Tamil Nadu, and Chennai, which is the capital city of Tamil Nadu. So if we were to look at it according to government's figure, Tamil Nadu slum residents amount to 5.8 million, which represents 17% of the state's urban population and 8.9% of the country's total slum population. However, I must also say this number is grossly inadequate. Yeah, next slide, please. So if you were to look at the experiences of Madurai, I must say that Madurai is a temple town of the state of Tamil Nadu. And I will be specifically taking an example of one of the initiatives, because I wanted to also say that how, advocating for community-led initiatives is a very difficult task in this in the country. So it took almost 3 to 4 years for a community group to fight for their housing and also to ensure that their voices were heard in the entire planning processes. So in Madurai Corporation, we'll be talking about, I'm going to share about one particular locality called Subramaniapuram, where it was a rental housing program constructed for the conservancy workers, or the term cleanliness workers is currently being used, the cleanliness workers of this particular city. So the housing was constructed in 1945 and was in dilapidated condition. And for the last 30 years, this particular community has been writing umpteen number of petitions and multiple protests to ask for reconstruction of their houses. But it has not worked much because the government, unless and until they feel the pressure, they're not going to budge. That's how it works here. So then we started intervening with the communities, and we did along with the Housing and Land Rights Network, which is a Delhi-based group, we started facilitating formation of a Residents Welfare Association, because we found that one of the reasons for why their voices have not been heard is because of the sporadic efforts, and there was not much of collectivization. So we started this collectivization process by formation of a Residents Welfare Association and ensuring that equal representation of women were there in the collectives. Next slide, please. So after this, once the collective was formed, you would believe it, it took about 3 to 4 years to even get the voices heard. And finally, when the state budged was when the people went and met the chief minister of the state. So for getting basically a housing to be reconstructed, one cannot get justice at the urban local body level. One has to go to the topmost, power of the state to get the work done. So people met the chief minister of Tamil Nadu, submitted their petition, and only after that it started moving. And to expedite the process, as all of the community members, usually in India, most of our the settlements, the low-income settlements as well as the informal settlement, comprises of the Dalits, who are one of the most oppressed communities in the country. So we had to also, the communities had to, move the National Commission for Scheduled Caste, which is a custodian of the rights of the scheduled caste or the Dalits, in the country. So as a result of which, finally, after so much of pushing, the process was approved. And it took another 6 months of struggle to pressurize the government to establish a monitoring committee, because otherwise it's always a top-down approach. So finally, after a lot of push, they agreed to have a monitoring committee, of which one of the non-official member was from the from the community. So after a lot of advocacy, this finally happened. And it again took another few months after communities had to protest to ensure that the land was handed over from one of the government departments, that's the urban local bodies, the Madurai Corporation, to the Tamil Nadu Slum Clearance Board, who is in charge for the construction of houses in the state. So finally, it took a lot of these to and fro and back and forth discussions and debates, and to ensure that, the issues of the communities were collated and submitted to the government offices in terms of the design, in terms of the, finalization of beneficiaries, in terms, of the voices of communities being heard at various levels. So it was a big struggle, and I'm going to show some snapshots of how, the process. The next slides, please. So it was a very difficult process by itself, because it wasn't easy. So this is a snapshot of how the communities came together to, start drafting the petitions. The next slide, please. And the next slides and all will show you how all these things might look easy, but it was a matter of 3 years of struggle taken by the community. So it was a huge aspect of drafting and the petitions. And this is a photo of an official meeting in the Madurai Corporation. So finally, once people meet, the next time they had to protest to ensure that the officers listen to. The next slide, please. So so the following slides also show that how, it is not much easier, because these things are not mandated by the law. And this is the order which was issued by the Madurai Corporation to initiate a monitoring committee. And the sad state of affairs is that though we were able to push for this particular settlements, it was not possible for many other settlements in the same city of Madurai, because there was no legal mandates for government of Tamil Nadu to set up, community engagement processes. So finally, after, a set of media advocacy, the commissioner, who's the head of the urban local body in Madurai, makes a visit to the settlements and interacts with the community and hears their pleas, and then here's their petitions, their demands, and then finally the plan was incorporated. And this is a photograph of the women in the community monitoring the soil testing process, and also discussing with the officials. So it was a big challenge, because the government was not ready to listen to the communities. In the initial phase, there was a resettlement proposed, but because of the kind of advocacy initiatives taken by the community-based groups and the civil society organization, finally the in situ housing was approved. Now, this was a kind of a case in Madurai where it was possible to have a community-led process. And now I'm going to discuss about Chennai, which is one of the biggest challenges that we have faced. The next slide, please. So Chennai is the capital city of Tamil Nadu, and where we have seen at least, this is a chart of evictions where we have seen from December 2015, when Chennai faced one of the massive floods. Till date, there were about 14,601 families that were forcefully evicted with no prior written notices issued, and almost 90% of these particular evictions were carried out during the mid-academic year, when the school year was on. And it is also, as PIERRE was also presenting, I thought I should also link it up, and 500 of these evictions were carried out during the pandemic lockdown, and communities were left with nothing but sheds. Most of them did not get alternate housing in the alternative location. Communities were just left in their sheds. The next slide, please. And why I wanted to...
2 minutes
yeah,
left.
Definitely, I'll wind it up in 2 minutes. Yeah, so the next slide will also reveal about how this is a photographs of some of the evictions, where you see more law enforcement agencies will be there in the settlement than the people who are to be evicted. The next slide, please. Why I wanted to also bring this, why there is a need for a legal kind of an administrative reforms to ensure community that processes was one, because none of these evictions were carried out with any community participation at all. Even a resettlement action framework, which was supposed to be done for these communities, communities prior to the evictions was not carried out. One reason primarily because of the absence of legal safeguards, and that could be visible in the kind of language which is there in used by the court of law. These are some of the judgments. Just to say the synopsis of the judgment because of paucity of time, there were judgments which said that communities can be removed by use of reasonable amount of force. There were judgments which said that people cannot use the lower courts to access justice. Third, there were judgments which said that people living in along the water bodies or in objectionable location cannot access their basic government benefits, which includes the judgments went on saying, you know, electricity, water, and other, services need to be disconnected before the evictions. So there was a lot of force element in it. Next slide, please. So the plan, basically, the issue and the context is there. So what is the plan? Next slide, please. So some of these advocacy initiatives, which are the plans for the city, as well as this is what is continuing now, is one, as I said, translation of key legislation, policies, and guidelines in vernacular languages, because information is definitely power. And capacity building processes is basically to disconnect the disconnect between the policy and the communities, and is addressed by the capacity building process, wherever people know about their policies. Then to ensure that the people's voices are heard to the communities, lots of community-led researchers, people's reports, and social audits. We are just doing the delivery work of just compiling it and handing it over to the people, because people can then, you know, use it for their advocacy purposes. And we've also dealt a lot of community consultation processes, parallel processes. For example, there were this Tamil Nadu housing policy, which was, initiated in the state with no community participation whatsoever. So what we did was do parallel processes, compile those reports, and have a delegation from the community representatives to meet people. So community-led campaigns and media advocacy. So one takeaway from this particular webinar was that we also felt that there was a need to have participatory design processes. Though we are doing it, we thought we should upscale it because of the various other presentations that was also made in the webinar. And there is definitely a need for advocacy for legal and administrative reforms, which needs to be concentrated, because unless and until there is a policy safeguard, unless and until government is mandated, they're not going to move a finger. The next slide, please. So some of our, I'm just winding up with the last slide, which says how some of our community actions have, engagement with different funders like the World Bank, and engagement with government of Tamil Nadu by putting pressures through the community campaigns have resulted in the government adopting a housing and habitat policy for the state after 10 years of struggle. And finally, today we were one of the biggest success of this entire initiative was the government was forced to adopt a social sustainability and grievance management framework, which is finally defined, at least in Tamil Nadu, the stakeholder and community engagement approach. So though there are other two policies were also outcome of our intervention with the government, but though we see that all of these has come up, we have a long way to go, because most of the times in India, in Tamil Nadu, the kind of community consultation processes by the government has been tokenistic. So it puts a pressure on civil society and the community-based groups to ensure that, you push through the existing, arenas to ensure that your voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And sorry for the limited time, but you managed well, so thanks a lot. Now we'll move to LLOYD RANQUE. LLOYD is a consultant at the office of Senator Laila de Lima and a community development consultant for the office of the mayor of Quezon City. From 2014 to 2017, he worked at the Presidential Commission for the Urban Poor, conveying people's organizations working on people-led housing, pushing for policy adaptation and implementation reform at the city and national level on socialized housing. His work as a consultant involves writing on national issues in the areas of politics and social justice, and giving technical support for communities under community mortgage programs, and undertaking people-led housing affected by city infrastructure projects. LLOYD will share with us the people's plan of their federation ALMANOVA, a federation of 13 homeowners organizations in 2 barangays in Quezon City. Yes, LLOYD, the mic is yours. Lloyd, are you there? I think we have a technical problem.
Okay. Hello, is Mojo okay?
Ah, good. Yes.
Oh, what happened?
Go ahead. Lloyd, are you there? Ido, can you help out? Something is happening. We're facing a technical issue here.
It's the internet connection of Lloyd.
Yes,
And
I am afraid
he
so.
left.
He left.
Oh, he's still here. He's still here.
Okay. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Is my audio okay now?
Yes, it's fine.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Don't see you anymore.
Okay. Thank you, Margie, for your... wait, I just...
You have to share your screen. Or...
Yes. I'm right there already. Do you see my screen?
No, your camera is still off.
Wait, I'm just fixing it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Do you see now my screen?
Yeah, I see you. Not you're not sharing your screen.
So I'm having an internet problem now. Okay, I'll try to fix this.
Yeah.
Okay, this one. Okay, about that.
Starting your screen. Yes, very good.
Okay, I'll just enlarge it. Okay.
The slideshow, and then
Yes.
we're all set.
Okay. Thank you, Margie, for your nice introduction, and good evening, everybody. I'm sorry about
Can you
that.
put it to slideshow? Yeah. Sorry, Lloyd, can you put it to slideshow?
Okay.
With a big screen?
Yes. Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Very good. Yes,
okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'll try my best to give this presentation within the time slot allotted to me. But before I proceed, I would like to welcome also the officers and members of ALMANOVA. They're here joining us tonight. I guess aside from showing their support to our good friend Melissa and to this webinar, is to check also if choosing me to share their story experience was not a mistake. I hope I can measure up to their expectations. My title here is How Did ALMANOVA Do It? I revised this presentation from my original after watching the previous webinars and Margie's insightful SWOT summary last week, in the hope that we can contribute also to our discussion and share aspects of People's Plan that previous presentations, I guess, have not touched on or perhaps hinted at, but did not fully explain due to time constraint. Of course, I'm referring to the ethics and values that should guide people's organizations who would undertake people-led housing. In other words, the primacy of having an ethical framework rather than just merely riding on the process and going through the motions. As we all know by now, each people's plan has unique peculiarities and nuances because its success or failure largely depends on the readiness and capacity of a people's organization and is largely influenced by the process and attitude of the local government and involved national agencies towards it. By saying that is also an admission that people-led housing in its current practice is replete with arbitrary processes and has not reached yet the level wherein there are surest steps to implement it. So now I will share with you how ALMANOVA did theirs. ALMANOVA, or Alliance of Poor Neighborhoods in Novaliches, is a federation formed in 1994 in response to threats of demolition due to the forthcoming massive 98 meters wide road widening project by the national government, now called Segment 8.2. That will traverse 8 barangays in Novaliches district of Quezon City. ALMANOVA knew from the start that people-led housing is a daunting endeavor, primarily because the size of the work is enormous and housing is not free. And in our part of the world, the movement of the poor is tied to their houses. If they are affected by national projects, their geographical and socio-political space is decided not by them, but by the type of housing project the national government implements for them. That is mostly off-site, relocation in far-flung and remote locations in the provinces, sometimes next to quarry sites, if not in the big empty, where they are cut off from their jobs and sources of livelihood, and where basic needs such as power and water and access to transportation come several months later. That's why for ALMANOVA, people-led housing is the way out from this housing trap. So I put the entire text here so that you can read my slides in case we have internet interruptions, again, like in the previous weeks. And also, I can beat my time slot by speaking faster. When ALMANOVA began conceptualizing its people's plan as we speak of it today was almost non-existent, if not generally unheard of. There was a system to carry it on a larger scale, or a plethora of terminologies to use around to facilitate easier discussion and purpose. It was not the immediate driving force, in fact, for ALMANOVA. The driving force was simply to organize against the oppressive mode then of relocation, and even now. So ALMANOVA requested sets of training from various NGOs with expertise on community organizing and housing, mostly Ateneo-based or trained. It received all relevant training from basic such as organizational management and development, meeting facilitation, mediation and negotiation, savings mobilization, to more technical such as land research and land title verification, etc. It optimized its social capital because ALMANOVA was already a force then whom politicians were eager to please. It used its federation as leverage to get the support of barangay officials, city councilors, congressman, mayor, and contacts from the national government. It also joined networks of NGOs and established connections with them. At one time, ALMANOVA even fielded a candidate for barangay election in won to ensure presence and representation at the barangay level, and received crucial and advanced information about the project. This decision proves to be useful for ALMANOVA. I'll explain later on why. Doing savings mobilization and having sound financial management. ALMANOVA obliges members to do savings as a way to instill discipline and commitment. Free riders are not allowed in ALMANOVA. Members are given an orientation before they start savings to teach them the why and how, with safeguard mechanisms in place. ALMANOVA cannot withdraw any amount on their own from the savings without federation resolution signed by all presidents and the stated purpose. But members can because it is their money. However, they have to inform ALMANOVA so that it has its record and own copy of the transaction. ALMANOVA was able to fund through its savings and members' contributions land research and hire an NGO to assist them in technical work and give legal advice. And this also proves to be a game changer. I'll cite examples also later on. Land research and site visits to different sites and housing projects. ALMANOVA followed leads and tips about possible land and look at the property and talk with the landowner. They also did rounds of site visits to different housing projects to help them envision their own housing and community. ALMANOVA sought city accreditation and membership from City Development Council, City Urban Poor Sector, Local Housing Board, to establish a presence in joint policy discussion on the urban poor sector and have access to vital city information about the project. Proposed land sharing of the 98 meters with the proponent agency. ALMANOVA requested an allied congressman to commission a study to support the idea so that no one would question the feasibility of the proposal. The result is the corridor development strategy, replicating the approach of other countries. ALMANOVA then wrote its position paper and submitted it officially to the local interagency committee. The committee unanimously adopted the proposal and set the sharing. The agreement was 60 meters for road and 38 meters for mixed use in barangay housing. Consistent attendance and proactive participation in all meetings on the project. This constant engagement, along with submitting various proposals and stated recommendations, has gained ALMANOVA one seat in the local interagency committee for segment 8.2 to represent the project affected families. ALMANOVA has also been appointed as member of the local housing board by the city mayor to represent the urban poor sector. And here's now the District Bill 15 ALMANOVA Housing, the first collaboration between the city and people's organization on housing to People's Plan for segment 8.2. So while the technical plans for segment 8.2 were still in the works, ALMANOVA continued looking for lands because the on-site housing for segment 8.2, the 38 meters, would not be enough for all its members. For years, they went looking around different cities. But lo and behold, there was one large property inside the barangay. ALMANOVA accidentally found it because of their access tax mapping records of the barangay to their leader and convener, who was a barangay official. The decision of fielding a candidate for the barangay election paid off for ALMANOVA. ALMANOVA talked then to the property's caretaker, offered an intent to buy with the barangay and city as guarantors. They talked to the city mayor. The mayor was surprised that ALMANOVA had 1.2 million pesos in the bank from savings mobilization. This was in 2008. The mayor recognized right there that ALMANOVA is a highly organized and serious organization. According to him, then Mayor Feliciano Belmonte, most organizations do savings when the project is already there. It was the first time I encountered the case of ALMANOVA, who does it from the get-go stage. Here again, savings mobilization benefited ALMANOVA. ALMANOVA led the drafting of barangay resolutions, requesting the city to acquire the property and secretariat the negotiation. The negotiation over, the city acquired the property for ALMANOVA housing. But the national funds for People's Plan projects were fast drying up, and the local government sent a shock wave of resistance to people-led housing across all organizations by not issuing building permits for reasons of alleged corrupt practices among POs, or perhaps they saw people-led housing as their competition with their own city-led housing. It was already a race against time, so ALMANOVA had no choice but to enroll its property for District Bill to get around these bureaucratic walls. This was a risky move for ALMANOVA because although the mayor was ever supportive in encouraging community empowerment, they were now dealing with actual people in the bureaucracy who would not give ready and sympathetic ear to status quo disrupting plan and grassroots advocacy. They were dealing with hardball defenders of traditional top-down planning and implementation. So as you see on your screen, this is the relocation and resettlement action plan for ALMANOVA People's Plan District Bill 15 Housing Project and the details of the project. And here that ALMANOVA's baptism of fire on People's Plan actually began when it tried to partner with the local government in the housing construction. Its training and negotiation skills were put to severe tests. To form, the City Housing Task Force applied distorting pressure on ALMANOVA's People's Plan. They wanted to get a bigger slice of the generated housing units, allocate these units to families affected by city projects from other barangays, and exert complete control on the project. A complete recipe to destroy any People's Plan. But ALMANOVA, being ALMANOVA, would not take that sitting down. It stood by its People's Plan and braved the full heat of the negotiation. It used all its established political connections, submitted hardline positions on the beneficiary selection and state management, and repeatedly asserted that the project is People's Plan in collaboration with the city and not of the city alone. So when the task force saw that they were dealing with a tough organization in ALMANOVA, they tried a different tack. They divided the housing project into two schemes. One, socialized housing, all for ALMANOVA members, and another, the so-called economic housing for middle-income earners. And here, the tug of war continued. ALMANOVA saw that the task force could not be swayed out of this plan, so it conducted socioeconomic profiling of its members on their monthly income and capacity to amortize. The result, ALMANOVA demanded a portion, one building from this economic housing, and showed to the task force the result of its profiling, showing some ALMANOVA members' ability to amortize for the economic housing. ALMANOVA came out victorious in the negotiation and outsmarted the task force by showing data. The only part ALMANOVA had little control over the project was on the housing design. It submitted its recommendations with the help of an architect, and some were adopted while others were not carried because the local government wanted to maintain their templated design for Bistic Bill projects. So as you see on the screen, this is the Bistic Bill project of the city that attaches the name of the proponent people's organization. Unlike other Bistic Bill projects, you won't see the name of the people's organization. But in ALMANOVA...
Sorry, you have 2 more minutes.
Okay. In all this, you will see ALMANOVA maintaining its ethical framework as an organization rather than just going through the motions. It did not compromise its position on the beneficiary selection and on taking over the management of the project, because in all other Bistic Bill projects, it is a city that does the project management. And here you will see ALMANOVA construction monitoring team ensuring the quality of building materials. At present, among all Bistic Bill projects, ALMANOVA has the highest amortization rate. The members dutifully pay their monthly amortization because they practice savings. One member, in fact, has paid the principal amount of her housing unit from years of savings. When ALMANOVA decided to enroll its people's plan in Bistic Bill, it was eyeing the bigger picture, segment 8.2. ALMANOVA had to gain experience, had to know the inner workings of the city on housing, had to gain the trust and confidence of the implementers, and in the process, show them the value of people's plan. ALMANOVA learned from this experience a lot. With the same approach in land research and submission of proposals, ALMANOVA wrote the Department of Public Works and Highways to request the agency funding for its phase 2, also for the affected families of segment 8.2, modeling the capacity of ALMANOVA to develop and deliver commitments in Bistic Bill 15. The department has granted the proposal. The City Housing Department also recognizes that this is people's plan and will be managed by ALMANOVA. Also, the city attitude has noticeably changed on account of some of the old guards of top-down planning having retired or removed from office. The atmosphere now is very encouraging and supportive. Initial understanding, 5-story buildings with larger units for about 1,000 families. Change the design to be more oriented to family use rather than the current condo type designs oriented to individual use. ALMANOVA to have control over the housing design within the budget, in hiring its contractor, on beneficiary selection, and estate management. So here, this is the ALMANOVA optimizing its cultural capital. ALMANOVA is predominantly women-led. The founders are women and the current convener is a woman. They are good at diffusing tensions during tough negotiation. They handle stress better. They're adept at looking for alternative solutions rather than debating endlessly on a particular concern. They have an eye for details, being more knowledgeable about community. ALMANOVA has good records keeping and management. Sometimes when some agencies lost their documents, ALMANOVA has a copy and they would request ALMANOVA to furnish them. The ALMANOVA negotiates from the strength of its organization and the potency of its studied position, back up with data if necessary. It targets the right person, decision maker when discussing hard-laid positions. ALMANOVA ensures position paper and demands included in the agenda. It does not just transmit its position papers, it works for its inclusion in the agenda to make them official and seek the adoption of the committee. By this, ALMANOVA can outsmart others who have vested interest to sideline the organization and compromise its project. ALMANOVA conducts General Assembly and our leaders meetings to make a uniform and informed decision before attending crucial interagency meetings. Here, ALMANOVA does not request and wait. It proposes and initiates community processes, volunteers to assist the city in sorting out requirements and document submission, and deliver commitments. So I asked ALMANOVA what they wanted me to emphasize on for this presentation, and this is what I'm sharing now with you. ALMANOVA perspective, key qualities in people-led housing. 1, having an ethical framework is extremely important rather than just showing the process. knowing the process. The processes in people-led housing are mostly arbitrary and can be changed on the fly. So PO should watch out that going through the process would not compromise their people's plan and their core values as an organization. Next, organize people's plans around systems of safeguard mechanisms to protect the members from possible fund embezzlement and profiteering, to avoid dysfunctional relations and power tripping, to have working committees and checks and balances and ensure accountability. In partnership, study your position and push hard enough. Otherwise, what you will get is their entire version of your plan. But don't be hostile during negotiation. Keep your composure and be persistent. Don't just say no, offer alternatives. But if PO concurs with the agreements, take care not to violate them. Partner and collaborate, but maintain independence, especially with politicians and implementers. Example, ALMANOVA would never request food for community meetings. It shoulders its expenses. If politicians or proponent agencies wanted to be generous with ALMANOVA through funds, it would not accept it as such. It will enter into a memorandum of agreement with them and translate the financial support into organized community programs and services so that all the members could directly benefit. Next, PO presidents or conveners must not act. PO means people's organizations must not act alone or attend meetings by themselves or enter into agreements, especially during negotiations. Other key officers must be around to avoid possible project compromising situation, also to immerse next in line leaders and share accountability to facilitate better handling of project-related concerns. As we try to accomplish our project, we must try our best also to influence the local policy on housing, to be more open to people's plans and insert tested and effective procedures generated from our experience. For example, consultation. Local government units are weak in and most of the time bypass meaningful consultation on projects, an essential aspect to people-led housing. I guess this is the last. Raise new leaders from your ranks. In District Bill 15 ALMANOVA, the community is now led by younger leaders trained and supervised by ALMANOVA seniors, while the seniors are working on segment 8.2. This is the effective way for ALMANOVA to sustain its built-up community and transplant there the culture of ethical leadership. The District Bill 15 ALMANOVA community is youthful, dynamic, and proactive because of these younger leaders. So here are some of examples of the activities of the younger leaders in ALMANOVA District Bill 15. So Zumba, regular weekly community meeting, urban farming, yes, and they decorate their each building during Christmas. And yes, and there are some of the activities that ALMANOVA initiates: donation drive for typhoon victims, relief drive for the victims in neighboring community, and hosting frontliners. And here you'll see District Bill 15 ALMANOVA, mostly young, next inline leaders. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lois, for this very interesting presentation. Also very nice advice from the community, very, very useful. One question, how long did this whole process take?
The housing construction started in, the negotiation started in 2015 and the housing construction began in 2017. So most of the members have already moved in the District Bill 15 project. But the land acquisition, the land negotiation began way back in 2008.
2008 already, you see, so this all takes a very long time. Thanks. Okay, great. Now we're going to move to our panel, because to guide VANESSA and LLOYD in the refinement of their people-led housing plans, we have invited three panelists, three experts who are very experienced in implementing people-led housing projects. And two of them you've already seen in the previous webinar. The first one is RUEL ORCAJADA. He's one of the pioneers of TAMPEI, the Technical Assistance Movement for People and Environment Incorporated, which is the technical support unit of the Homeless People's Federation Philippines Incorporated. RUEL was coordinator and facilitator during international and regional workshops and national summits, and he was one of the lead trainers in the community mapping in key cities, and he was also the manager of Save the Children's Burst project. Next, and you've seen her in the second webinar, is Philomena CINCO. She's the barangay captain of barangay 412. CINCO is also the president of Nangkakagasang Mamamayang Nang Legarda Incorporated. Through their people's plan, they realized in-city housing of 21 families along the Estero de San Miguel de Garda. Under her leadership, her barangay was twice awarded the most outstanding barangay overall category out of almost 900 barangays in the whole of Manila. And last is Eric Villanueva. He was also with us already in the second webinar. And he's the program coordinator of the local governance program of the Institute of Popular Democracy. He taught physics and mathematics at the Philippine Normal College and studied economics at the UP School of Economics. He also assists the task force Pabahai of Pasig City Public Housing Policy. I would now like to open the floor to the panelists for their comments on both Vanessa and Lloyd's presentation, People's Plan. And we'll do this in the order that first RUEL will start. You have 6 minutes, then we'll give the floor to CINCO and then to Eric. You all have 6 minutes to give your comments to both People's Plans. So RUEL, please go ahead.
Okay, good evening everyone from the world. My main takeaways on the presentation of Vanessa is that it is quite good that we are pushing for policies for community-led process. And then it is also amazing that we were translating this key legislation policies in vernacular language also. It's really nice that the people really understand these policies because these policies can be used later on the development of the projects. And also it is quite nice that you were doing a lot of capacity building process also, but maybe I will ask what kind of capacity building process that you already done with the community. Also in highlighting and involving community-led research and researchers. And the next one is demonstrating community participatory process. So basically, as a technical, on the technical side, we must involve community also in the process of site planning and housing design process, such as workshop trainings. We need to involve them on those process. It's also a way for them to have a sense of ownership. It's really important, the sense of ownership from the community. We involve them on the process, especially on the pre-design, the design, and then to the construction. Importantly, we need to highlight also the social preparation aspect of the community. If they're not yet ready, sometimes there's some having problems, especially on the next part, especially on the technical part. One way to, maybe a suggestion also, one way to enhance their participatory learning experience is by linking them to Slum Dwellers International, because they were facilitating groundworks activities such as community-led upgrading, savings program through the community. So that's what are my main takeaways for the presentation of Vanessa. And then for the question, just a simple question, have you already did some community participatory process such as design workshop or any capacity building training? Maybe you could answer that later on. And then for the presentation of Lloyd, it was really an interesting presentation, especially on the part of the social preparation aspect of the community. The word ethical framework, it is the first time that I've heard that, but it's really interesting. Number one, read the readiness of the people or the community is really important. The people's organization, they must be ready in order for them to engage in this really long process. And then the type of housing, you stated that type of housing of the, sometimes it was being decided by the upper, but we need also to, what you did is that you consulted an architect, but maybe I would ask, did the community undergone series of housing design process, especially the design you have done is a mid-rise building, so I'm interested on the process that you have done. Especially what takeaways also is the land research. It's really important for the community to have a land banking on all those available land on the city. And then, optimizing social capital, it's really important. Also, one thing is the saving mobilization. It's really important. A lot of process will involve savings and monetary. And then, So, issues of building permits, it's really, you have that we have really a lot of problems, especially with people's plan in order in the context of the building permit, and then also the land sharing, socialized housing, and economic housing. So my question is that did the community also involved in the project monitoring, especially on the part of the construction? It's really important, and also the process and the housing design. That's my main takeaway. Thank you, Martha. Are you're muted, Martha?
That would happen once at least. Okay, okay. Thank you very much, Ruel, for sharing these important questions, points. Now I would like to give the floor to CINCO. CINCO, are you there? I saw you. Now I don't see you anymore.
Yes,
Yes, share your question. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. The community-led housing plans in India, in terms of challenges and policy, political agenda, government priorities and programs are almost the same, like here in the Philippines. The presentation of VANESSA, she elaborated that there are so many efforts conducted by the community. So they did not stop lobbying, they did not stop for pushing the community-led housing project, just like what we did here also in the Philippines. We do not have a state-level legislation on informal settlement also until now. So we are still lobbying for the passage of JARA and DALISA. Just like in India, as reported by VANESSA, that there are so many efforts, especially in curbing policies on the community-led housing project. Even the institutionalization of our people's plan are still struggling to be accepted and recognized by the Philippine government. So with the India, so I can we have the same experiences and challenges as India. So we almost have the same dilemma, like the people's participation. We are not always welcome, just like in India, by the housing agencies, and they need to fight always to be part of any discussion, especially on housing issues. Good for them because they continue to lobby, they continue to find ways to voice their rights in the housing. So hundreds of meetings was conducted by the different communities there to meet with different government agencies, both national and local units. Same here in the Philippines. Nevertheless, we continued lobbying, finding windows or connections to push our People's Plan housing initiative. The same experiences are as follows. The community initiated the conduct of their soil boring tests. Just like us here, we initiated the soil boring test of our on-site housing project. We do the land research also and provided the legal documents needed for the complete staff work for the presidential proclamation of our land area. The social preparation was conducted, and so with the savings mobilization. And we also finished, or we provided the master list of the beneficiaries, especially the displaced people, just like in India, who are all from the river, was affected by the Chennai flood. Just like here in the Philippines, most of the evicted families are from the displaced families of the Undoy flood here in the Philippines. So I can relate much to the report of VANESSA because we have almost the same experiences. They continue the struggle for people's plan. They keep united. They keep united. They work hand in hand. So with us, until we finally got what we want, the construction of the DSWD Micro MRP Socialized Shelter Project for the 21 families living along Estero de San Miguel. India and Philippines faces almost the same challenges and problems when it comes to lobbying and advocating a people-led housing project. We also have the same insight and beliefs. A decent and affordable housing is a basic human right that the government should address and make it happen. So with the report of Sir Lloyd, Sir Lloyd mentioned all the necessary ingredients or aspects to make people-led community project to become successful. All the advices to continue lobbying but with composure, to keep on fighting for our human basic rights, which is the housing. So the People's Plan here in the Philippines, just as what Sir Lloyd has presented, the ALMANOVA community project is a very successful one. And most of the communities who are advocating for the people community-led project is looking up to the ALMANOVA presentation or project presented by Sir Lloyd. So with that, just we keep on working hand in hand, believe in what we want to achieve, and to continue lobbying with composure to our government. To VANESSA, the group of the Indian residents there are very strong. So they did not stop lobbying for what they want, a decent housing project. That's all.
Thank you, CINCO, for pointing out the parallel between India and the Philippines in the struggle of communities to fight to realize their right to adequate housing and to keep on pursuing to realize that right. Now let's move to the final panelist, that is Eric, for your comments and questions.
Hello and hello and good evening. I think the case of ALMANOVA, or the case of the informal sectors affected by the project of the Department of Highways and Public Works in Quezon City, is a case of the same old case of tension between a central corrupt bureaucracy called the National Housing Authority and local actors trying to have a larger say in what happens to the communities of the informal sectors that will be relocated as a result of the project. So there's been one reason why that project has been delayed already. It's so delayed, is because people do not want to take on, to accept the housing solutions, the housing proposals offered by the NHA, which is the same formula. Relocation to outside Metro Manila mostly, and a token housing development inside the city. So that's the main strategy of the National Housing Authority all along. And that is why I think there is a group of advocates, Judas Guerra and Melissa and everybody else is involved, that that advocated that the funds be transferred to the local governments and let the local governments implement the housing projects that from funds that will be coming from the Department of Public Works and Highways instead of the NHA, so that locally the local stakeholders, the local governments, and the local people's organization can come up with solutions that's more acceptable to everyone. And so we will. I think. Yeah, the fact that a solution has been found ultimately by ALMANOVA by partnering with the local government to build ALMANOVA housing is even if it's replete, even if it's laden with the same tensions between local governments and the people's organization, is a step in the right direction. There should be local control in housing instead, so that local accountable institutions can talk to one another instead of an unaccountable bureaucracy at the center. Okay? Corrupt, unaccountable bureaucracy. NHA has to be abolished. Okay, that's one. But even if we're going to, locate housing decision making locally, there has to be still a national framework. So that's why India's VANESSA's sharing on how they've been trying to make to establish the needed policy framework is very important. There has to be national legal framework that recognizes housing as a human right. Okay, so, because that is not how they view it. So housing as a human right has to be established politically. Housing struggle is a political struggle. Okay. Now, but what kind of housing? I think the sharing of PIERRE and Nina, is very important, even if it's something about you do a survey to see. You did a survey to see in which type of housing tenure are residents less likely to be evicted. I think that's given. It's going to be collective cooperative housing controlled by the residents themselves. No, that's given. No, but I think it's very important to emphasize housing cooperative as a housing solution that grows out of the social movement, that grows out of social solidarity. Still market, but the framework is, we need housing. We work together, to establish housing, to produce what we need. So I think that's the advantage of the housing cooperative framework. It puts the dwellers right at the center of the stakeholder structure. So the primary stakeholders are not the developer, are not the financier, but the dwellers and the users of the housing services under the housing cooperative framework. But then I have a very, I don't know if this is off, but I think the study, if it's still ongoing already, if it's still ongoing, I think it would have to consider questions like, in view of the pandemic, how are we going to change our minds about what social housing for the poor should be? In the Philippines, social housing for the poor means very small living space, 24 square meters, 28 square meters. No, you can be lucky to get 32 square meters. when you can construct a loft, no, I mean loft, yeah. But in beyond the pandemic and the need for um, um, everything that they say about what we need during a pandemic to avoid COVID, no, housing should be expandable. You know, kids will grow up even if they have two children only. Those kids will grow up, and in view of the pandemic, they have to have ample space. No, so uh, uh, but how to solve it? Because financing is the problem, no? So maybe under a housing cooperative framework, no, uh, um, um, people's organizations or the housing cooperatives themselves should have some guidance on how to address that demand, address that need by way of a very important experience in Chile by what do you call this guy? He's a guy called Aravena, no? Of incremental housing, so that even if at the beginning the housing units constructed for the poor is small, no, you can expand it later on to the next room on the side, and then to the next floor, so that and I think this should be the norm in constructing socialized housing uh, from now on in view of the pandemic. No more very cramped or very small accommodation for the poor. Ample living space for even for the poor in view of what we've learned about the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric, for your passionate comments and emphasizing the political and the policy elements of people-led housing, and also the incremental aspects, which I think are also very important. Now for the final response on the questions and comments and suggestions from our highly esteemed panelists, could we give the floor first to Vanessa and then to Lloyd to respond and to wrap up, please?
Thank you so much for the comments. And one thing that I was also very interested to find is that when we are negotiating with government, it is good to also show, also take examples from different parts of the country, because it makes our work basically easier to kind of, negotiate with government, saying that, there are practices where communities are taking up initiatives, community-led housing practices are there, so why don't we also adopt? So I find this entire webinar very useful, and I must thank the organizers for it. Secondly, in terms of the question which came upon what kind of capacity building, one of our because IRCTUC by an organization is a compilation of various civil society groups and community-based organization. One of the things that we're doing as of now is, apart from legal education, which is very important, referrals, because sometimes we feel, as Eric and others have said, it is very important to politicize the issue. So we have to kind of create an articulation, a kind of an articulation around the issue, that other stakeholders, other groups who are working on similar issues need to come together so as to politicize, so as to increase our negotiation space. So that is one thing that we are definitely doing. And apart from that, we also do a lot of shared learning processes within Tamil Nadu, because we realize what happens in Chennai does not happen in Madurai, what happens in Madurai does not happen in Coimbatore. But we have also had practices where certain good practices happen in Madurai. So we try to, ask, communities go and visit each other, also extend the hand of solidarity, because this issue is something that is across the country, not just across the country, but across the globe. So the sense of solidarity, what one must get, is very important, and that's what we try to catalyze through these. And apart from from that, one of the initiation, when we talk about processes, participatory processes, one thing that we have been doing is demonstrating alternatives by even encouraging children to come up with models. Because for government, whenever we want to influence the housing, the best thing we do is we ask children, the communities, come up with their models. The moment they come up with their models, government cannot say no, and it kind of opens a space of negotiation. So, and I must also thank all of the panelists for giving these encouraging words, because somewhere we feel that, when we see these presentations, we know that things have worked, which also encourages to keep moving on, because otherwise this entire struggle is very, very difficult. And when we see things that, especially in Lloyd's presentation, when we see things are working, it kind of motivates us to keep moving forward. Thank you.
Okay. I think the question addressed to me was, well, was there a design workshop that involved the community? Yes, there was. And but like I said, ALMANOVA had little control over the design, but some of the ideas were carried. But ALMANOVA formed a construction monitoring team to ensure that the quality of building materials are up to standard. And also, ALMANOVA plans to carry over the design workshop to then phase 2. So because phase 2 is exclusively for ALMANOVA project. Yeah.
Yes, Lloyd, you want to still respond to something, or this is it?
Oh yeah, I'm done. I'm through.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Then I would like to thank you all very much for this very interesting interaction. I hope, this is stimulated, as Vanessa said. It's important, I think, to make the connection and to see that we're all that you're all in the same, trying to achieve similar things. I would now like to hand over to Mary for the closing statements. Mary, are you there? Hello?
Yes, okay, I'm there.
Good,
Sorry.
great.
I was talking away. Let me just bring out some of the things I think that is important for us to remember after the series of 4. One, that there's a lot to be said. And all of, the time has always been so limited because there is so much more that needs to be said. But this is a way of getting these ideas into the larger awareness, all across the board. Clearly, people are at the center of this process. Clearly, people have to lead when it comes to this kind of approach, whether it's housing or any community-based initiative. It's their strength, they're the stakeholders, it's to their advantage. And that in these communities, it's almost always the women who are in the forefront because they're there. They have the initiative to keep pushing. They have the, in the Philippines, you'd say makulit. You have to keep going, you never stop. And women, I think worldwide almost have that because they've had to struggle too all their lives. So the notion that struggle is a political process. And also it's very clear that the support groups that enable communities to keep learning, to find out how to make new connections are really all very important. They can claim the victories, but those victories happen because other people care and put their own time and money and effort and into supporting people's initiatives. I think that's what all of these discussions have shown. So the whole civil society sector, but the need to bring it into the policy level so you scale up, so you have, as Vanessa very clearly pointed out, and others, policy perspective. So I think we should close by reminding that people have a right to housing, as was said many times by many people, and that in the end, they have a right to the city. They may be informal settlers by certain circumstances, but they have a right to be there. That rights include not just civil and political that we are more familiar with, but social, economic, cultural rights like to housing, to health, to education, and so on. So I want to thank not only all of those who participated in the past, but especially again, those who were here, who have been here tonight. Nina Quintas, Pierre Arnold, Vanessa Peter, Lloyd RANQUE, Ruel ORCAJADA, Eric Villanueva, Philomena CINCO, and our backing up Melis Navarra and MAARTJE von Erd. The institutions they represent, the IHS in the Netherlands, the Social Anthropology Department in the Philippines. And I think with this, and again, we have to apologize for all those who want to ask questions, but we hope you put them in the chat, and I think we will try and get some feedback to you. Please provide feedback when you get the feedback discussion. And if you would like to write, anyone here, you can be provided their emails at the very least. So I think we have to close. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. This may be the end of this, but they always say, as in graduation, its commencement means you're ending a phase, but you're starting a new one. So start, everybody. Thank you, and goodbye for now.
Thank you very much, Mary.